We're going to look at containerized development environments. Now, one of the interesting things is that we're going to, and Melissa and I did not talk before this session. You're going to hear some of the same topics, but here we're going to go a little bit lower level on some of the things and go through some examples in terms of technology, in terms of how to do this. We do this where I work right now, and it takes a little bit of while to get used to it, to be honest with you, but once you start doing this, it's really pretty amazing. So first off, we want to say, sorry, my presentation just hanging on me here. I just did all this. Sorry about that. Let me try again.
Idi's back.
Is it home? So it's not syncing with my screen here. Just yeah.
This is working good.
Let me try starting PowerPoint again.
If it's treating it as an extended screen.
I did do extend.
That's probably what.
Okay.
Probably have to drag it over.
I should bring it over. There we go. Okay. So happy 10th birthday to Docker. The cake you see on the left, so I've been a part of the Docker community for quite some time. This is Docker birthday party 3. So it's really been kind of something cool the Docker community does, and celebrating the number of years that Docker's been around. It's a great technology, and I'm still hanging around it myself. So a little bit about me. I'm a solution architect at Soltech, based right here in Atlanta. Just if you know where the Salesforce Tower is, that's where our offices are. I've been around a little while. I started coding in 1976. That's 47 years ago. And I started coding professionally in 1985. I still code. I love it. It's a passion of mine. It's a hobby. Like I said, I get paid. I still get paid for my hobby. I'm very, very happy to do so. My wife has no idea when I'm going to retire. I don't. So community involvement. I love being involved in communities. I've been involved in user groups and communities since the mid '80s. I love the environment. I'm a regular D-Zone contributor and a core member of D-Zone. Docker Meetup, I was part of the organizers of Docker Meetup pre-COVID, and happy to be a part of it now. And I've also spoken at DevNexus. I was there just a couple weeks ago as well. Containerization experience, I've been using Docker for 9 years in production, and Kubernetes for 6 years. So I've played a lot with Kubernetes and with Docker, and I've got some battle scars, but also hopefully some things I can share with you that might help you in your journey. So why develop with containers? The company I work for now, and we've probably already been, a number of you have been in this kind of situation here, and Melissa mentioned it at the beginning, onboarding developers is a challenge. It's a huge challenge, right? And the more complex the stack gets, the tougher this gets. And you have documentation, and then you got to talk to Joe next door, and then Susan over there because she did that part. You know, all this stuff can take quite a long time to get a developer up to speed. And they have enough to learn with domain knowledge and all that kind of stuff. The tech stack is just something else they've got to learn. So a tedious workstation and tool setup does not make for a great first impression. You bring somebody on board that takes them 2 weeks to get their development environment. It's like, what did I get myself into, right? And in addition, many companies have a plethora of stacks, right? So you may work at a relatively small company, but you've got some version of the application that's 8 years old that nobody knows how to use, and the stack is so old that nobody even knows how to build it anymore. I was working on an application this week where the stack is from 2016. Now that's not that old, but to try to get all those dependencies on my machine with everything else on my machine is really a pain. And as Melissa talked about, so there's just a myriad of dependencies. I work with a lot of React developers, front-end developers. You know, how many versions of NPM, how many versions of Node does everybody have on their machine? It just really gets out of hand. So without an efficient process, valuable time and money is lost, and and money to an organization means something, right? So containerization, some of this is just echoing right what Melissa said. This is a great segue. Containerization is an improved approach to developer onboarding. It's an improvement over replicating environments. Previously, we've probably all run Vagrant or something on our machines to try to build these environments. And that's even that's tedious, right? Because you got to build the OS, and they're very cumbersome, and you're not going to get a copy of Postgres and a front end and a back end all running in Vagrant, easily on your laptop, which is what I'll demo here today. So it's either, and some of you may have already been in this situation where you actually have a workstation for, okay, this application, I use this laptop, this application, I use this laptop, this kind of thing, right? That's expensive, and it really gets to be bothersome. So with containers, to Melissa's point, environment replication is much more efficient and cost effective. The process is also deployment environment agnostic. So whether you're developing on your laptop, and I've been involved in a number of organizations that have done this, and those that attended my DevNexus, I know there's a couple of folks here, the DevNexus presentation a couple of weeks ago, I am a huge proponent of shifting left, and that is that the environment that I deploy locally, the source code, the build process, the Helm charts, everything is no different than anywhere else in the entire process. It's the same image all the way through. Now, locally, I'm building my own image because I'm going to trash the system because I'm doing some testing. But once it gets beyond my machine, you're talking about the same image throughout the whole system. So when built properly, a containerized environment development will run without change on any contemporary infrastructure. And that's very true. So, but we're developers. We don't like to take on more work. We got enough work to do. This has to be easy, right? It cannot be, you cannot add, 20% more work for a developer to do because they're already 20% behind in the work that they've got going. So this is, the process I'm gonna step you through here is not trivial, all right? It's straightforward, but there's work. But if you take a step back and think about the amount of time that you take to ramp up a developer, the amount of time you take ahead of time to get these environments in place and iterate through them, you're way ahead of the game. And hopefully I can demonstrate that to you. So what does the process look like? I'm going to run through these slides kind of quickly as I have these, because first of all, Melissa talked about a bunch of stuff, which is awesome, but also have some demos to show as well. Please interrupt if you have any questions and stuff I'm talking about. So the objective is always about delivering code to production. Developers often forget that the reason they're developing code is to deliver it, right? They like to play with the latest toys. I do. I like the shiny stuff. I like the shiny things too, right? But developers are being paid to provide value to a business, and that value is deliver applications, right? So every single thing a developer does is about delivering applications. A question that I've asked developers, I've worked for product companies for most of my life, is I would go to a developer and say, what are you doing for our customer today, right? And I'm working on a Maven POM. Okay, so how is that helping our customer? And they need to be able to articulate that because you have to work on Maven POMs, right? But how does that benefit the customer? Everything is to get the developers and the engineers to think we're delivering this code. Okay, the development environment should be compatible with production. Melissa talked about this. It's a great topic. The entire process should aim toward the goal. Greenfield projects are few and far between. Not many of us get the opportunity to work on a nice, shiny new project, right? Where you can start with all this really cool stuff and do the best methodologies. If you're in that group, you're lucky, right? Most of us start with some big old, WebSphere application that we've got to break down into a bunch of, microservices and get deployed somehow into containerized environments. So you've got to do this incrementally. You've got to pick and choose. The term I use often is establish a beachhead somewhere. I'm kind of a World War II buff. So you establish a beachhead, you get in there, and you start chipping away at that functionality. and take, and however you choose to do it, the riskiest stuff, the most fragile stuff, the stuff that's the oldest, whatever the process may be, as a business, figure out how you're going to do this incrementally. And you have to understand the tools throughout the pipeline. We're talking about development environments, right? But that development environment, if it's completely disparate to the CI system or to the production system, you're just replicating work and you're making a lot more work for yourself, right? So when you're building a development environment, even if you're not doing it in containers, but containers do, in my opinion, make it easier, you need to be thinking about every stage in the pipeline. So how is this helping, my pipeline? How is this helping my delivery cycle? So whether it be through developers, QAs, CI/CD, DevOps. I'm a shift left person. If you're familiar with that terminology, it's bringing everything over in the process as far left as you can from the perspective of another term I use is deployment begins with the first line of code, right? So deployment begins with the first line of code, and that's what shift left is about. So almost every talk I give, I put in this slide. Okay. This is not the only way to do this, right? We all know, I've been a developer for a long time. You look at somebody else's code, that way, and so it might be good code, but I wouldn't have done it that way. So you may be thinking as you go through this, I wouldn't do it that way. That's fine, right? The idea is this is a pattern and a process. You may do it a little bit differently, but this is something that I found that works in multiple organizations. So Melissa talked a little about images. I'm going to dig into images a bit. I believe very firmly, in terms of the images are key. This is where Docker, these are containers, these are images. I mean, this is what we're talking about, but they're the foundation for this. And it's not just about building an image, it's about building a collection of images that make your application secure and also consistent through each stage in the pipeline. So back in the day, back for birthday 3, image size was a factor. Well, how big was the image? We need tiny, we need Alpine, we need BusyBox, those are all still good images. Image size really isn't the issue it used to be many years ago, because first of all, the layers are cached. You're not bringing 5 times your Java images onto those nodes. They're sharing all of that stuff, right? So image size is still a factor, but it's no longer, in my opinion, a driving factor, right? From an application perspective, want to keep it in mind. But you want to strive for images built efficiently that are prioritizing a common ancestry. Melissa talked about that. I'll show you an example. Security, you may call this attack surface. The more, it's not about the size of your image, it's what's in the image. The more stuff in your image, the wider the attack surface is, therefore, the more vulnerable it is to a malware or any type of other malicious attacks. And then productivity, right? We've become comfortable with writing big huge applications in whatever language you like. I've been a Java developer since before Java was GA, actually. And people say, "Oh, Java applications are so bloated and all that kind of stuff." Well, there's a yes and no, but the productivity there's value in that. The machines can handle the stuff. So make sure that you're looking for productivity in your image as well. So ancestry, security, productivity. Understand everything, and Melissa talked about this sometime. We could have written our presentations, I think, together. Understand everything that's in the image, right? I've worked in fintech, and from that perspective, where an image goes through an extreme amount of rigor in terms of audit. Okay, we're installing this, we're installing this. Why do you need this? Why do you need that? Why do you need this? You need to understand every single thing that's in those images, right? It's typically, you'll see here, I start from a very bare bones OS image and then add every single component individually. In those images. So it's operating system components and application components both. Okay. So This is a sample image pattern. Remember, this is just a sample process, something that's worked for me in the past. I look at it from the perspective of I start with, what do I need to run my application? What's the runtime image? You know, do I need a JVM, right? Do I need Node? What do I need? What are the just what I need to run that image? Not to build it, not to do anything else with it, just run it only. Okay, this is the most secure image from the perspective it has the least amount of components inside that image. Okay, just what it takes to run it. And then a build image comes next. I have some examples of these. I'll show these. Build image is next. So we take, because we all know we can inherit, and Melissa showed that, inherit images. So from the runtime image, you create the build image. Well, now the build image may have Maven installed, or Gradle, or whatever tool that you use to build that image. Now, depending on the CI/CD system you use, I'm an old school Jenkins guy. So Jenkins allows you to, with its current Kubernetes instantiation, allows you to define the image in which your application is built, right? This would be the case for that. So, and that image just simply, it adds just enough more components to get that image built, okay? Then finally, in this case here, you have your development image. So your development image has to contain your runtime components, has to contain the components you need to build your application, and then I call the personalized environment, right? So I'm a ZSH fan. If you're a Z Shell fan, that's what I like. You know, you put Vim on there. You know, you put, you make everybody sudo everything. You know, in the development container, all the stuff that you want to do. That if you think of it like it's your own workstation, right, where you have super user privileges over everything. And so, but all of these images are simply increments over one past the other. Okay. So, any questions about that? I'm going to show some Docker files here in just a second. Any questions? Make sense? Yes, sir.
You were talking earlier about the image size,
Yeah.
and it's not the most important thing. And you mentioned like Alpine, and it's not as important anymore. But then you're also talking about like the attack surface and everything else. Those two statements seem kind of.
Yeah, it's a good question, and that's why I say it's not the driving factor anymore. It's still a factor. It's not the driving factor. You still have to be intentional about what you're putting in. I mean, as soon as you put the JVM in a container, you've just made it huge. Yeah. Right. Even Node for that, you've made these containers huge, right? So, I mean, most containers now, or most images now, are well over 500 meg in size by the time you load all the components into it. So I'm an Alpine fan. I do a lot with Alpine, right? Alpine can be problematic at times as well because of the way that the libraries work in Alpine. So if I'm looking for productivity and I run to a robot with Alpine, I'm going to Ubuntu. Right, I'm not going to worry about it. Yeah, I'm not going to play around with it. It's a very good. So you need to. It depends on the use case and the situation in terms of how you want to do it. I actually use Alpine or Ubuntu, almost probably 50-50 for both of them, depending on what I'm doing.
Thanks.
It's a good question. Okay, so let's look at. We're going to start with the runtime and build images because they're really pretty much the most straightforward of the two. So. I need to stop my presentation here. Sorry. There we go. All right, and then drag this to the right or to the left? No, to the right. Good. All right. So I'm working on repo. I eventually get this published onto GitHub. I'm just still kind of tweaking it. I've been kind of infatuated with Quarkus and trying to learn. I'm an old Java guy, and Quarkus has been interesting to me. So I'm doing a lot of playing around with it. So I'm building a set of images, and we'll start with runtime Docker file here, and let's see. These images are not complex, right? They're very straightforward. So I start with, so once again, we talk about versioning, and mostly talk about versioning. I am extremely specific on the OS. I mean, that is 2023-0301. That is my Ubuntu image. I'm not just doing Ubuntu latest or Ubuntu 2204. It is very specific. Okay. Now, I didn't, and it was a good point Melissa made, I did not do specific versions on the individual packages that I'm installing. That's actually a nice addition as well. But as you can see here, I have a number of, I do a lot of parameterization of my images. You can see that even though the Ubuntu version is Jammy 2023, blah, 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 that it's also a variable. So I can use a build arc and change that to another version of Ubuntu if I wanted to, right? Same thing with Java. I'm using Java 17 here, and just what I need to get this image built. So wget, curl, unzip, HTTPS, and Tiny to run the image in a to run the process in a very small process space, very enclosed process space. I create a user right away, in this case here called Quarkus. Never run your images as root. I'm sure everybody knows that. I run your containers as a root user. I immediately create a user called Quarkus and install the JVM, and that's it. That's all the runtime images. There's nothing else. There's nothing else to it in this case. Okay. Yep.
So with respect to running containers as root, never doing that.
Yeah.
I've never heard multiple sides to it, I guess, but now you have container runtimes that allow for UID or user ID shifting.
Yeah.
So that no matter what you run the application as within the container, it can be its own isolated domain. It does not have the same access outside the container.
That's true.
So there's a lot of bloat that comes from, or overhead of having to create a user, set the home directory, all of that in a container, and then every single one that you create versus just like relying on the runtime to go ahead and handle that for you.
Yeah, it's a good point, and so and I can't disagree with that point. However, at the same time, what I'm building here too is the file system under which the application is going to run, right? So it's not just about the user and running within that user. It's also when I'm starting to lay the foundation for, I'm always going to run the app here in OptQuarkus, for example, right? So it's building the entire the entire runtime environment. Even so your point is perfectly valid. But here it's just baked in. This is the absolute base image. So from here on out, I don't have to do anything else with users. Yeah, good point. Yes, sir.
I've never heard of Tiny before.
Yeah.
And I noticed you don't have an entry point. So is Tiny acting, and how does that work if that's?
Yeah. So I do not have an entry point in here because the entry point will come later. And you'll see that in just a second. But so Tiny just takes the process, and I'm gonna be very upfront. I don't know all the absolute details, but it runs it within a process space within the container that keeps it very encapsulated, right? So it's a very, very tight run space. If anybody else has any information to share about that, they could be happy to share. Yes, sir.
And so in the process, this is kind of like if you're building that golden image, and then your application is going to run on that golden image. Docker file is the one point, which is then going to bring in all of the dependencies and start a process.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good point. Thank you. Okay, so let's look at the build. The development one we'll take a look at because it's a little bit more. So the build one is a little bit more to it because you can see here almost everything's parameterized. The whole base image is parameterized, right? But now I'm adding Maven, and I'm adding in this case Quarkus, setting the path for the environment. And that's all the development images. Now, as you iterate through this, you may decide, oh, I need this, I need that, whatever you may need. This is just an example. So once again, building from the previous version, once again, parameterizing it so that I'm not, I don't have to redo this Docker file if I change the base image. I can just simply, send build args to it and let that image build accordingly. This image is also very straightforward. Here I'm adding get. I mean, the base image of Ubuntu does not have get. There's no reason to have get on your runtime image. Well, I shouldn't say there may be times in which you want it, but most often you wouldn't have get in your runtime image. That's the only thing we're adding here. Okay, so now let's go to the development image, which is a little bit more involved. So I mentioned this earlier. The development image, you build it as if it were a local workstation, right? The tools, utilities, the shell extensions, everything. Access to organizational resources, Git repos, the Docker registries, the Helm chart repositories, your SSH keys, configuration files, everything that you would use, on your local machine, you put into the container. Okay. This is a very iterative process. Think about when you get a brand new machine. How long does it take you? Well, I can say how long it takes me to get the machine just the way I like it. It takes a long time, right? Because I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this. So the same thing with these images, right? You just continue to refine them until you get to the point where, yeah, this looks good, right? And the other thing is that you need to understand that the tools today, I'm going to demonstrate VS Code and IntelliJ. So for those so I'm an IntelliJ fanboy. Okay, so if you want one of them IDE licenses, you want one of those things. No matter where I work, I have my own personal license. I carry it wherever I go. But IntelliJ and VS Code have done a spectacular job of both allowing remote development environments, right? And so that's what really starts enabling this. As a matter of fact, I'm going to demo, if we have some time, depending on how the time goes. Sometimes I get lost between whether I'm on my machine or in the container. Right? That's really the truth. Because even the command line environment, everything looks exactly the same. It works exactly the same. So one of the things is that the different IDEs, the different tools, have multiple ways in which to connect to containers. The one that they all have in common is SSH, right? So VS Code can connect to containers directly. IntelliJ cannot do that yet. And sometimes you just might want to use VI if you're a VI person or Emacs. So one of the things that I add to the development environment is actually an SSH server. So that means that whether you're using VS Code, or if you're using IntelliJ, or if you just want to SSH into the container or run VI, you use the same pattern to get into those containers, right? So like I said, it's ubiquitous. Every tool supports SSH, right? Now, this violates some of the principles of running stuff in a Docker container, because technically we'll have two processes running in one container, right? So if you're a true Docker container purist, it's one process per container. Well, that's not going to be the case here, right? So we run the SSH server, and then we are also going to run our IDE as well. So, but this is the development environment. This isn't going anywhere further than our local environment. So let's take a look at the development image here. So if we look at development, this one's not a whole, I mean, in terms of installing stuff, it's not doing a whole lot, but I'm going to show you something in a bit here, show you the entry point. So I'm adding JQ and Vim, and I have to actually open SSH. Sudo, curl, ZSH, I'm a Z shell fan, class, this list can go on and on. Whatever the heck you want to add into your image, just add all your favorite tools. Then the first thing I do then is add the corpus user to sudoers, right? Because I want a sudo inside this container, right? And I also have an entry point, and I'll talk about this script in a second. The other thing I do, you see a copy up build at SSH into SSH. That's the configuration for the SSH daemon that's going to run on the machine. I changed my shell to Z shell. I created a directory called WNV. And if you remember, the worker was opt Quarkus. Okay. So if you notice here, the first thing I'm doing is copying opt Quarkus into a separate directory. And I'll talk about the reason for that in a second. And then I remove the build directory. So this is just a pattern that I used in the past. The thing that makes it, the demonstration I'm going to do here is with Kubernetes. You can do this with Compose just as easily. I like Kubernetes in this case because I can use a stateful set for my Docker image. So if I delete my pod, it's no big deal. I just restart the pod and all my data is still there. Everything is still in there because it's a stateful set. You can do the same thing in Compose. Kubernetes, to me, makes it easier, makes it a little bit more portable. But the reason why I copy opt Quarkus into entry point ENV is the fact that if you know stateful sets in Kubernetes, if I mount opt Quarkus as a stateful set, it gets wiped out, right? So I've got to take everything I've built so far, copy it off, so that when I start the container, I can copy it back, okay? And that's what's going on in here. So if you look at the entry point, couple things to do is, first of all, I just do a change out just to make sure everything's cool. Once again, so the first thing I do is copy everything back into opt Quarkus. The other thing I do is that, because this is a local development environment, is that I mount, and I won't get into much of this, this is a Kubernetes thing, and just for time's sake. So I take the contents of your local SSH directory and mount it as a secret in Kubernetes, and then copy it into the container, right? So you don't have to worry about your SSH secrets or anything like that. I take all the public keys and just make them authorized. Say, this is just a local environment, nothing here has to be secure, right? So, so we just copy those over as well. Because we're SSH we lose our environment. So with the SSH daemon, so you've got to explicitly tell the SSH daemon what environment variables you want. So I copy Java home, that's the only one this application needs. And then I install OMyZSH because that's what I like. And then what also is part of the deployment is that when I deploy, this is built and deployed as a Helm chart eventually, right? Is that there's an environment variable that tells me what Git repo the chart is in. Well, I have my SSH key and I have my Git repo. So when the container starts, it just clones the repo right into the container, right? And I'm ready. And so I'm ready to go. And then finally, the last thing it does is starts the SSH daemon. Okay. Any questions or comments on it? Yes, sir.
I don't know if you're going to address this in the future. So you're completely relying on the state reset to not lose if your repository is dirty?
Yeah. Yes. So if
you haven't committed out yet.
Yeah, so for good Agile folks, we're committing multiple times a day, right? But yes, but you're right. So, but with Kubernetes, the stateful set is very reliable, right?
Okay.
So
No, I'm not saying it should. I'm just saying that's what you're using.
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, it's a very good question. It's a really important point to this process because nobody wants to lose a half a day's worth of work, right? Yes, sir.
Yeah, just curious why we're using like a Docker exec or kubectl exec to do the SSH into your container rather than copying the SSHD and doing all the other stuff.
It's a great question. So because we're about onboarding developers and bringing in an entire environment that's encapsulated and replicated and codified right into a single environment. Once a developer runs this, all they have to do is go to VS Code and say attach. There's nothing else a developer will have to do, and I'll demonstrate that, right? Or IntelliJ, attach, and their entire environment is there. Right? There are no Kubernetes commands to execute. I mean, other than Helm deploy, right? So these images that are being built by whoever the tech lead of the team is, right? And the developers themselves are not building these images. They're pre-built for the developers to then, and in my case here, to just simply pull down the Helm chart and deploy it locally on their machine. right? So the whole environment. It's a good question. Now, you have an example, we probably won't get to today, that where I have a script called terminal.sh, which uses group control exec to get in. But also because I created an SSH daemon, most developers are fine just SSHing into that. And so they don't even know any Kubernetes commands in order to access this environment. They're just going to SSH into it. So it's a good question, though. Any other questions? All right, so let's see, where are we? Deployment. So we talked about this. If a developer loses work, they'll abandon this, right? We know this. So if you lose, work, you're just gonna say, I just lost half a day's worth of work. I'm not gonna bother with this. So you need to select a deployment mechanism. I talked about this. You can do this with Compose. I prefer Kubernetes myself, simply because I can develop a Helm chart, have it all be there, build the stateful set, and be done with it, right? The other thing about Kubernetes that's nice is that we probably won't get to the examples today, but I have, if you've done demos before and presentations, you always have a backup. So in my Kubernetes clusters locally, I have the demo namespace where I was going to demonstrate this, but I have the backup namespace that has all the same stuff in it already running, right? So you can actually have multiple instances of it running in the same Kubernetes cluster. So it says, I prefer Helms. I use this to sometimes raise opinions, come across as fact, that it is an opinion, and just make sure about that. And I think it's closer to production. Should it be included in the production Helm chart? I am a huge proponent of this deployment being a part of the main production Helm chart. It's just simply controlled by deployment parameters. So there isn't a separate Helm chart for this environment. This Helm chart is simply part of the production Helm chart, and it is included with and determined when it's deployed by parameters. It's more portable, and Helm's extensible as well, and Helm has built-in documentation support, which I haven't demoed here. Yes, sir.
Somewhat unrelated, but
Yeah.
I'm curious what your thoughts are regarding customized versus Helm. If you have any thoughts there.
Yeah. So whatever the platform is that you guys choose, just keep it consistent, right? It's whatever you're using in production, right? Come back all the way to wherever you're using in production, bring it all the way back. Okay.
Just one quick.
Yep.
Are you actually doing SSH in production as well?
No.
Okay.
No. The SSH daemon is only installed in the development image.
Extend this process to maybe testers as well?
Absolutely, yeah. I worked in an organization, a couple organizations ago that all the QA folks had Kubernetes running on their laptops. So they could deploy the app on their laptops as well as the shared integration environment. Now you need a fairly decent laptop to do that, right? But it's doable. So the parent chart. Oh, the parent chart. I need to show that. So I'm a Helm guy. I've been using Helm for a while. So the Helm chart here is part of the corpus. This isn't super well documented, but if you know Helm, the Helm chart here is very simple. Right? Two things. A deployment YAML. This is all the standard Helm stuff at the top. This is pretty much all standard Helm stuff. The image is the image that I'm deploying. And you see the environment Git repo is the environment variable. Ports, you may choose to expose ports. That is available here as well as a Helm parameter. Config map, you can do config map preferences if you want config map stuff, all the stuff that you would do with Helm. This is the parent chart that would be installed for all use cases to use this Quarkus pattern, right, for development. You'll see here the mount path. You can see var secrets SSH. That's where the secrets will be deployed before you copy them into your local .ssh directory. And the volume bound out focus for the stateful set as well. Okay. If you don't know Helm, take some time to learn. It's really cool. It's a really cool technology. We're not going to talk about it a lot here. Just kind of give you an example. I see a lot of parameters in here. If you went to the Nexus presentation I did, I probably over parameterized because I say about parameter you don't use just becomes a constant, right? And so, I use a lot of parameters and things because it creates a lot of flexibility. The deployment chart, which I will bring up here just a sec. Again. So the deployment chart then becomes very straightforward. The deployment chart for development now is simply extends, because if you know how you can extend a chart just like you can an image, and yes, you will see. Where my IntelliJ setup. So if you the deployment chart becomes very straightforward. The deployment chart, if you look in here in templates, if you know Helm charts, there's no deployment YAML, there's no service YAML, there's no nothing, right? Because all we're going to do is parameterize the parent chart, right? The only thing that's in here is a couple of hooks, one for my SSH keys and one for, I just put a test environment variable in there, right? So this is driven, SSH keys, for example, are driven by the fact that I copy those into an SSH directory. I use a Maven, I'm a Maven guy. I'll take the SSH directory from my machine, copy it into the chart, build the chart, deploy the chart. Right, and so when I deploy the chart, my SSH keys are part of the chart that are on my local machine. Okay, there's a lot of cool things you could do this with. As a matter of fact, let me show. I'm trying to be mindful of time here as well. Just see if we can see what this looks like. So I do enjoy running Kubernetes on my machine, and I'm happy I did a pre-built. Notice my namespace is pre-built demo. So if I look at secrets, there's my SSH keys, and if we look at these, you will see that this is all I really have in here. But my known hosts, my ID, so everything that's in my SSH keys directory is copied into this secret, which is then dropped into the image. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So if you know Helm, you know Kubernetes, this path is pretty typical pattern. So once we have all that, we can connect. So instead of worrying about deploying it, let's just connect, right? So that screen up there is really tiny, so I'm going to use this one here. So I'm going to connect to SSH and pre-built. Right? And what you're going to see in here is the code that I have in my. So this is the code that is in my Git repo. So you can see I'm working on it here. I can open up a terminal session, and you can see where I am right here. If I do, the reason I know I'm in Kubernetes is that you can see the name of my host name here is some gobbledygook stuff, but it's my stateful set name, right? So I can do you can do a Maven install in here, just like you would, on your local machine. It'll go ahead and do its thing. So everything in this environment runs just like it's running on your local machine. The same thing goes for IntelliJ here. I am a bit of an IntelliJ. Oh, let me see that. So IntelliJ has for remote, they have a thing called the JetBrains gateway. Show that real quick. And then that will show us where we are here. So the JetBrains gateway allows me to define all kinds of connections. So if I go into my SSH connections, so I have this one here, last active today at 2 o'clock where I tested it. So this IntelliJ takes a little while to start up, right? So it takes a little while to start up on your machine, takes a little while to start up in a container. Regardless, this is still JetBrains IntelliJ running inside that container. And I can do everything I can do with IntelliJ except for everything's running inside the container. So all the dependencies, everything is running in there. Even if you've played with JetBrains at all in terms of the remote environment, just like VS Code, the server runs in the container. They have a client that runs locally, and then you're ready to go. So that is running a little bit long here. It's loading. There's my README file. And you can see that I can go in here and all the same stuff that we saw locally, I have inside my container as well. So that is everything in this, in really quick, as quickly as I could do it. And so the thing to keep in mind is that when you're done with this, is that it looks like a lot of work, right? But the amount of time you're saving your team, because only 1 or 2 people are going to do this. When it's done, it's done. Everybody uses it from there. There are a few, if any, missing steps. Most mentioned documentation. We all know the documentation gets out of date. Documentation here is never going to get out of date because this is the running environment. And consider the result, the streamlined development environment, and it's much closer to production. So there we go. Any other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
So if you have multiple projects, would you suggest having a local for all of those multiple projects? Just one?
So it's a good question. It kind of ties into the monorepo question earlier. It depends on how your team works, right? So I'm a fan, I see the case for monorepo and the case for individual repos. It depends on the team. And in that situation, if I'm working, I need, as a team member, I need to be able to deploy anything, any part of the project. So therefore, if I want to deploy microservice A in development mode and run microservice B in production mode, I want to do that. If I want to run 2 of them, in this case here, I have 2 namespaces running 2 different development environments, that's perfectly fine as well. In the Kubernetes environment, there's a lot of flexibility in terms of how you'd want to build and deploy this. Depends on team structure and the more senior guys are going to be able to deal with multiples. The more junior folks are going to say, okay, here's your sandbox, right? It depends on how the team is set up. Does that make sense? Does that help?
Yeah, but I want more like, so I have like the multiple myself, but we've tried to do this. Our image got too big and then it got specific to the guy who was creating it. So we kind of just like threw it away. But it does look kind of cool how you have it set up.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if you seen it easier to be adapted, like if I bring this out, is it easier to adapt if I give them like 10 images, or is it easier to adapt if I give them like 1 or 2?
Well, so I think so. Let's say you're a Java shop, right? Let's just say you're a Node shop, whatever you are. There's 1 Node image, there's 1 Java image, there's only 1, right? And then there's 1 build image for Java 17, for example, right? The development image is where it kind of gets wild west, because it depends on the team, perhaps, right? Maybe a team will settle on an image, but those base images, in my opinion, in an organization, Java 17, Java 17, Java 17, there shouldn't be another Java 17 image. Okay, and some people may find that restrictive. the farther you go up or down the chain, the more it'll be appreciated, right? Because there's only one Java image, for example. So that way you don't have lots of images, maybe at the very tail end where the developers are, where it's highly customized, but other than that.
Relate to this in a way, how do you feel about build stages or like Docker stages, right? So like you can use that for your runtime and then have a different target stage for your development environment. Yeah, I feel like there's probably pros and cons to just having separate images for each one and or just have something like that.
So to the point that Melissa brought up, I am a huge fan of as soon as it's built by the CI server, there's one image, makes its way all the way through to production, right? And if there's a change, you just rev it and take it all the way through, right? Because you have all those stages that have to be validated. If you're a React developer, or React is you're putting your .env files. I see this a lot. .env file, each individual image that violates 12 factor, right? There's other ways around that because you're building an image for every environment, right? And so there's ways around that. So to Melissa's point, I'm a huge fan of development environments to have all the images you want. But as soon as it's built by Jenkins, Bamboo, whatever, Team City, it's one image till it's released.
Which, I mean, if you have stages, that could be the case as well, right? Because you're building it to a particular target, so you'd only have one image,
right?
Or multiple images, but a single image on each individual build, right? Just each at, I guess, different stages. You're just building a specific target. So I think it's a matter of like organizing your different like image or like specifications for each image within a single image versus having them separate.
Yeah, so
that might be explained.
so we maybe we're kind of talking like this because I do think there's just one image. There's always one image and everything's parameterized. Yeah.
So if you have a build file, you have your development stuff up here.
Yeah.
You could then have or base. You can have a from base down here,
Exactly.
and then basically have each of your different builds in the same file, whereas here you have 3 different files for your different Docker files, which is fine if you want to have that kind of separation.
Exactly,
But you can do it as a multi-stage, and that's kind of recommended if you want to use layers as well.
Exactly.
That's true. That's true. I mean,
You also want to be careful not to include any sort of your development image
Correct.
in there, but you're sharing it like that.
Well, that's why
Use
you,
the point where you could get that.
yeah, that's why you would start from the runtime image and work your way down versus starting from the development and then try to strip things back out.
Exactly.
so that I mean that's weird. Okay, I said this is a great slide. I wanted to show this. So the slide I showed earlier. I don't know where it's not coming up now for some reason, but the slide where I showed the 3 stages, right? That runtime image is the image that goes and with your app. If you're a Quarkus, and even now with Spring Native, you're putting you're putting an executable on. There's not even a JVM in a lot of cases now, right? If you're using Graal, you're actually putting an executable in there. But the idea is that once you hit, in my opinion, right? You be careful. So in my opinion, once it hits the CI/CD server, there are no other images built. Right. So yeah. Somebody else had a question? Yeah.
Just a comment. So a lot of our CI/CD systems actually use images to build, and that kind of breaks it has to be the same image because you have to, it's like a chicken and egg. You've got to have that image and constantly update it, and it doesn't, your dev is going to be different from your prod, different from your stage. So that's the only thing where I see that you can't push one single image all the way through. You're constantly iterating on dev. It's always going to be out of whack.
Right. So iterating on dev is a different topic, right? You can iterate all you want on dev. It just doesn't matter. So once you hit whatever your first quasi, whether it's QA staging, whatever it is, those are the stable images that are versioned. That's where if you're a Maven person, that's where snapshot comes off the version, the version name, and you start moving everything else forward from there. I mean, once again, a lot of this is cultural to within the organization in terms of what works best. The idea is that you really want a minimum number of images all the way through.
One more question while it's fresh in my head. Would it have been easier? Because I think in VS Code, you can actually just attach to a container.
Yeah, you can.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you just need a little bit of tooling.
Yeah. So if you're just a VS Code shop, attach the container. But if you want SSH, you want to use, that's why I did SSH because any tool uses SSH. But if you're just VS Code, yeah, you can just attach to a container. Right. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Very much. Well, we, Ray was part of the Docker meetup and helped support it over at Ignition One before the pandemic. So it's great, it's great to bridge the generations here, which is awesome. So we did go a bit over tonight. I don't think many of us really care, which is fine. It's awesome. However, so from a cake perspective, I do have some pieces cut. You can take them to go because unfortunately I do have to close shop at a certain time this evening. But really excited to have everyone here tonight. Now here's a couple things. I do want to announce our winner for the Nest if they are here. If they are not here, I have some runner-ups. So the winner is, for the Google Nest, is Dylan Jones. Dylan, are you here? All right, man. Yeah, I should have brought it in. It's much more exciting. When I have it with me, I have it in the other room. So we'll make sure and get that. And of course, my least favorite part of my job is the compliance paperwork. So that's what we'll be here all night filling that all out. Yeah, awesome. So congratulations to you. Now, if anyone wants, you were talking about some JetBrains IDs, and I've got several to give away. Okay. So here's the commitment I want from you. Take out it. Here's my email address. I'm going to give it to you right now. And you email me, and if you email me in the order in which I receive these, I will send you a JetBrains IDE free license for a year. Okay. I will say this, I probably have enough to go around, but here's the commitment I want. They won't send them anymore if you do not activate it. So your commitment is that it will be activated in the next 24 hours. You can renew a subscription with it, but if it's not activated, it's not a good reason to, I don't want to send it to you. So I'm only asking that you use it. So even if you're, new to programming and you want to try it, that's great. You could do that. So here's my email address. It's ariw@jfrog.com. Very simple. And in that, you're going to put JetBrains IDE in the header. At jfrog.com. Oh, JetBrains. Yeah, just JetBrains. And when you send that to me, it's your commitment that it'll be activated in the next 24 hours from when you receive it. Is that fair? Okay, cool. I really feel I will, just because of a time perspective, I have 3 pieces of Docker swag, and it's really vouchers for you to select your own. I'm going to give out randomly as well. So the first, let me see how I'm going to do this. No, I'm going to pick 3 people afterwards. You're going to trust me that I'm going to do a good job. But we have more to give out, and I know that Alba has sent me some additional swag as well. So we really appreciate Docker for sponsoring the cake we had. They actually sent us a voucher for this, so huge kudos to them, and a kudos to JetBrains as well. And until June, we'll have Ajit Rana joining us from Bangalore, and maybe one of your talks. So if you have a talk that you're interested in sharing, go ahead and send it to myself, and we'll put it in the pool for consideration, okay? All right, everyone. Thank you. Feel free to grab a piece of cake, and you can exit out this door over here, okay?